You should leave. You don't belong here." The words cut sharper than any knife I had ever felt spoken by Ethan when he was 13. I had stood frozen in the hallway, my hands clutching the edge of the doorframe, trying to steady the tremor in my chest. Years had passed since that day, and yet the echo of his voice lingered in the corners of this house, in the quiet spaces between walls and furniture, in every glance that never met mine. I remember the first time he had looked at me with that unmistakable glare, the one that said I was an intruder, a replacement for someone he would never forgive me for being. Back then, I had smiled, forced warmth into my tone, hoping that patience and consistency could bridge a gap I had no idea would widen into years. I had no illusions. I knew I was not his mother. I was something else, a presence he tolerated, only because he had no choice, a shadow of the love he had lost when his mother died. Those years shaped my days in quiet ways. I moved softly through the house we shared, mindful not to disturb my husband's routines, careful not to startle Ethan if he was home. I cooked dinners he might eat, folded laundry without comment, and lingered in rooms only when needed. Nights were the hardest, listening to laughter and stories that weren't mine, feeling the weight of exclusion, as though I had never belonged. Yet I stayed. I learned to carry the ache silently, to let it settle without complaint. I tended to the garden, the kitchen, the bills, the house, all in service of a life that included someone who would not fully accept me. And still I loved. I loved because love was not always returned. I loved because I had chosen it even when it hurt. That house had become both sanctuary and reminder, a place where I could care for the man I loved and the boy I had tried to reach, even if my presence was unwelcome. Ethan moved out the day he turned 18. The apartment he rented was small and sparsely furnished, but he insisted it was enough. The calls became infrequent short texts, brief holiday greetings, a happy birthday. Thanks for everything that never mentioned me by name. The distance was easier for him than for me. I stayed in the house that had been ours, maintaining the routines my husband and I had built, quietly holding the space for the family we once were. I kept the household running with the same care I had always given, tending to the bills, cooking dinners my husband liked, keeping the garden from overgrowing, and arranging the rooms so they were warm when Ethan visited. I continued to care for him from a distance, even when he barely acknowledged my presence. I knew that my role was invisible to him, a fact that had never changed in all those years. Still, I acted with quiet devotion. I managed the accounts, ensured the house remained in order, and monitored the smallest details of life we had shared. And I supported my husband, who was beginning to slow with age, helping him through doctor visits, handling the day-to-day errands he could no longer manage. There was a rhythm to it, a steady hum beneath the tension of absence, a quiet insistence that life would continue even when acknowledgement was withheld. Ethan carried his resentment like a shield. I could sense it in the brief pauses before his replies, in the clipped tone when he called in the careful omission of my name. He still blamed me for the years he had been angry, never knowing the truth of what I had done for him. He thought every opportunity he had, every support he received, came from his father. He didn't know I had quietly funded tuition payments, covered expenses, and guided his father's choices so that Ethan would not suffer more than necessary. The years stretched on like this, a careful balance between patience and endurance. I learned to be content with silence, to measure love in actions rather than acknowledgement. And while the ache of being unseen lingered, I stayed the course, knowing that my loyalty and care mattered, even if he did not yet understand. The day of the funeral felt impossibly heavy, as though the air itself had been weighed down by grief. I moved through the crowd quietly, offering nods and murmured condolences to friends and neighbors. but my eyes were drawn to the casket at the front of the chapel. My husband lay there, still a life ended too soon, and for a moment all I could feel was the emptiness beside him. Then I saw him, Ethan. He stepped into the chapel with a measured gait, dressed in a dark suit that hung neatly on his frame, his hands clasped before him. There was a calmness about him that I didn't recognize, a quiet tension that made him pause in the aisle before meeting my gaze. My chest tightened. The boy who had once spat harsh words at me, who had refused to accept me now, looked at me with something almost unfamiliar hesitation, and then the faintest flicker of remorse. He approached slowly, as if crossing an invisible boundary he hadn't dared to tread in years. His voice was soft, almost tentative. "Celia, I'm sorry," he said. "I should have never treated you the way I did. I want to try to make things right." The words struck me with the force of a sudden storm. My throat tightened, and I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides. I wanted to speak, to ask why now? Why after all these years? But the words lodged somewhere between my heart and my lips. Around us the chapel hummed with the subdued whispers of mourners, the soft scrape of shoes on tile, the gentle murmur of organ music. I noticed the subtle shift in the air, the weight of grief amplified by years of unresolved tension. Faces blurred past me, strangers and friends alike, all bearing witness to a loss that had changed us irrevocably. My mind raced, remembering the countless days Ethan had avoided me, the silent refusals. The letters he never sent, the holidays we spent with his absence felt more pronounced than the presence of anyone else. And yet, here he was, standing before me, seeking forgiveness, offering a fragile olive branch I didn't know how to receive. I nodded slowly, unsure whether it was acknowledgement or disbelief, as he took a hesitant step closer. The chapel felt simultaneously vast and intimate, as if the grief and the possibility of reconciliation were the only things holding the room together. As the minister began the eulogy, I felt Ethan settle slightly beside me, and for the first time in years I sensed the faint stirrings of something that might be called hope. After the service, Ethan asked if we could step aside, away from the small groups lingering in the chapel hall. His voice was quieter now, steadier, but the hesitation remained, the weight of something unspoken pressing between us. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a stack of folded papers, careful not to crease them further. "These are from Dad," he said, extending them toward me. "He wrote them in the last months of his life. I didn't understand everything at first, but I think you should read them." I took the letters, my fingers brushing his briefly, and unfolded the top sheet. His handwriting, neat but shaky, filled the page with words I had never known he would leave behind. As I read, a quiet realization grew in my chest. My husband had remembered all the nights I had stayed by his side, when despair threatened to swallow him, all the times I had guided him back from the edge without seeking acknowledgement. He had written of the moments I had reminded him of Ethan, of urging patience and gentleness when his son's grief and anger had seemed insurmountable. Every act of support I had offered, every loan I had quietly covered, every call, every word of encouragement was noted, credited to me, not to him. I looked up, startled to see Ethan watching me with eyes that reflected both shame and awe. He had never realized, not truly, the quiet ways I had been present in his life. His father had known. And now he did, finally. I felt a surge of emotion I could not name. Pride, relief, disbelief. The boy who had once rejected me, who had moved out and stayed distant, was beginning to understand the depth of what had been done for him, done without fanfare or expectation. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the stack of letters in his own grip. I had no idea," he whispered. "I thought everything Dad did for me was him alone. I didn't see..." You. I nodded slowly, feeling the long years of patience and care converge into a single quiet acknowledgement. The distance of years, the silence, the misunderstandings all seemed to press together in this small hallway, a tension that was finally loosening. I folded the letters carefully and tucked them back into my bag, feeling a tentative shift between us, a fragile bridge beginning to form. Ethan glanced at me again, and for the first time, I saw him not as the boy who had pushed me away, but as a man willing to see the truth. We walked slowly back toward the chapel doors, leaving the murmurs of the crowd behind the weight of unspoken histories, settling into something that might become understanding. The reception hall was quiet, subdued the chatter of mourners, soft against the clinking of glasses and the low hum of conversation. Ethan led me to a corner, away from prying eyes and sympathetic glances. His shoulders were tight, his jaw set, and I could see the way he wrestled with the weight of what he had just learned. I never realized, he began, voice faltering. All those times I thought Dad was just supporting me. It was you. You were there every step, and I didn't see it. He stopped, caught in the web of his own guilt, unable to finish the thought. I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. There was no need to rush him, no need to fill the space with words. I had spent years being patient, understanding, forgiving. My dignity was not measured by whether he acknowledged it, but by how I carried myself through the years of rejection. I nodded slightly, encouraging him without speaking, allowing him to confront his own conscience. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a small circle, glancing at the floor, as if the weight of his actions might crush him. I was so cruel, he whispered, so blind. I hated you for reasons I can't even explain now. I was angry at him, at life, at everything, and I let it spill over onto you. And you never stopped trying. The words hung in the air, heavy with remorse, and I felt the tension of all those lost years press against us. But I also felt something else, an opening, a sliver of possibility. The patience I had cultivated, the quiet strength I had maintained through every insult, every cold shoulder, every absence of gratitude, had carved a space for this moment to exist. He paused, eyes finally meeting mine, searching for a reaction. I offered a calm nod, an acknowledgement of his guilt without judgment, a bridge he could step onto if he chose. Ethan exhaled slowly, a hand trembling at his side. I want to make this right. He said the words carrying the tentative hope of reconciliation. I allowed a small, controlled breath to pass, feeling the tension ease just enough to consider what might come next. The first steps toward rebuilding what years of misunderstanding had worn away. After a few moments of silence, Ethan took a step closer, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. Celia, I know I can't erase the past, but I want to try, he said. I want us to start over, if you'll let me. I want to understand, to be part of your life in a way I never was before. His eyes searched mine, seeking permission, seeking acknowledgement, and I felt the weight of all those years settle into the present moment. I kept my expression steady. I had carried my share of grief, rejection, and hurt, but I had also learned the power of patience and the quiet strength of endurance. I wanted to see him step into the responsibility he had avoided for so long. I nodded slowly, signaling that the door was open, even if just a crack, and he exhaled as if a burden had been lifted. He spoke carefully, recounting small details, times when I had quietly intervened in his life, moments he had assumed were his father's doing. Hearing him acknowledge them aloud, piece by piece, brought an unfamiliar warmth to my chest. It was not pride, not triumph. It was relief. The boy who had once turned his back on me was beginning to see the truth of my presence. I don't want to overstep, he added, hesitating. but I hope we can share some of the things Dad and I missed. I want to know you really know you and maybe help each other through the grief we've both carried." I studied him for a long moment, recalling the countless times I had supported his father through despair, guided him through loss, and reminded him of Ethan's needs. Now, those same lessons were reflected back at me in Ethan's words, forming the foundation of a fragile trust. Slowly, I reached out, placing a hand lightly on his arm. He met my gaze, a tentative smile breaking through the tension, and for the first time in years, I sensed the possibility of connection, the chance to rebuild what had been fractured. A week after the funeral, Ethan called me with a quiet urgency in his voice. "Celia, I'd like you to come by my place," he said. "There's someone I want you to meet." I hesitated for a moment, memories of the past tugging at me, but the sincerity in his tone was undeniable. I agreed. When I arrived, the front door opened before I could knock. Ethan greeted me with a small, nervous smile. Behind him, the scent of warm bread and soft blankets hinted at a home filled with care. He led me through the living room, where soft light spilled from the windows, catching the edge of a small bassinet in the corner. My heart caught. There she was, a tiny, fragile bundle wrapped in pastel blue, her eyes closed as she slept. Ethan knelt beside her and gestured toward me. "Celia, this is your granddaughter." I froze, disbelief and wonder mingling in my chest. The child's tiny fingers twitched, and for a moment, the years of resentment, distance, and misunderstanding seemed to vanish. I knelt slowly, careful not to startle her, and gently held her in my arms. The warmth of her small body pressed against me, and I felt a connection I had longed for in silent, unacknowledged ways. Ethan watched, a mix of relief and hope in his eyes. "I wanted you to meet her," he said softly. I cradled her close, whispering a gentle promise to be there, to watch her grow, and to offer the love I had long given silently. Ethan stepped closer, and we stood together in a fragile peace, the tension of the past replaced with tentative hope. The room felt warm, safe, and soft, a stark contrast to the years of cold distance between us. For the first time, I understood that the path forward was not just about forgiveness. It was about presence, about being part of the life that had once seemed closed to me. As I held my granddaughter, I felt the weight of the past ease slightly, and I realized that this new chapter, fragile, hopeful, and full of possibility, was only beginning. Ethan sat beside me on the couch, his hand resting lightly on mine. The baby slept quietly in her bassinet nearby, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that somehow made the room feel both fragile and infinite. He took a deep breath, and I sensed the weight of what he was about to say. "Celia?" He began, his voice steady, but soft. "We wanted her name to honor you. She's Celia. Celia Hartwell. Your name." The words settled over me like sunlight through clouds I hadn't realized were hanging so heavy. I felt a surge of emotion, a quiet wave of gratitude and relief. Recognition long withheld had finally arrived, and it carried with it a depth I had not dared hope for. The child in the bassinet, my granddaughter, now carried not only a name but the legacy of years of patience, care, and unwavering presence I had offered silently. I held her hands, gently feeling the weight of everything the name represented. Every late night I had stayed up caring for her father. Every financial sacrifice I had made for his upbringing. Every moment I had guided her grandfather through grief, all of it converged in this simple, profound acknowledgement. Ethan's eyes were fixed on me, a mix of apology, admiration, and something tentative I hadn't seen before. "I know I can't undo the years," he said, "but I want you to be part of her life, part of ours. You've earned that more than I ever realized." I nodded, swallowing a lump in my throat. I had lived with the quiet knowledge that my love had been unseen, unrecognized, sometimes rejected outright. And now, standing here, holding the child whose name bore my own, I felt the first true sense of closure of my patience and endurance finally validated. The room was filled with soft warmth, a space where past misunderstandings could finally rest, and I realized that recognition was more than a word. It was a bridge. The tension that had defined our relationship for so long had softened, replaced by the possibility of a connection that had once seemed impossible. I leaned back slightly, feeling the weight of the moment, and watched Ethan as he gently adjusted the blanket over his daughter. And I knew that what came next would be the continuation of this new beginning. I leaned over the bassinet, my hands trembling slightly as I lifted the tiny bundle into my arms. The weight of her small body was both delicate and grounding, a reminder of the life I had helped shape in ways Ethan had never understood. The room was still the quiet, punctuated only by her soft breaths and the distant murmur of the television. I felt tears gather at the corners of my eyes, the first real acknowledgement of all the years I had carried silently, the years of patience, sacrifice, and quiet care that had gone unseen. Ethan stood close, his eyes fixed on us, and I could see the mixture of awe, guilt, and hope etched into his features. The boy who had once told me I didn't belong now watched as I cradled the daughter he had named for me, and in that moment everything shifted. The letters from his father, the confessions of gratitude that had arrived too late for the man who had written them, now echoed through this small room. Every word of guidance I had given, every act of support I had carried alone, had led to this, a bridge built from decades of quiet, unwavering love. I kissed the baby's forehead gently, inhaling the soft new scent of life, and whispered her name aloud. Celia. Ethan's hand hovered near mine, hesitant at first, then rested on my shoulder, a silent gesture of connection and recognition. He didn't speak. Words were unnecessary. The symbolism of the moment, the handing over of trust, of care, of legacy, was enough. For the first time, I saw the full measure of his change. The anger, the distance, the resentment that had defined our relationship for so long now softened into understanding. His eyes no longer carried the weight of blame, but the glimmer of someone ready to see and honor the truth. I adjusted my hold, rocking her slightly, feeling the steady rhythm of life in my arms. Every decision I had made, every act of guidance and protection, had culminated here. The child who bore my name was a living testament to the enduring impact of love, patience, and steadfast care. I set her down gently, watching Ethan lean over the bassinet, his expression thoughtful and tentative, ready to step into a new chapter of our lives together. I stepped out of Ethan's house, the baby sleeping peacefully in her bassinet behind the door, and took a deep breath of the crisp evening air. The weight of the past years, the silent endurance, the unacknowledged sacrifices, all of it seemed to settle into a calm that I hadn't felt in decades. I walked slowly down the quiet street, my steps steady, carrying with me the sense of completion that had long eluded me. In my mind, I traced the path from the first harsh words Ethan had spoken, the years of distance, the unanswered calls and unreturned letters, to the quiet moments at the funeral, the letters from his father, and finally to holding my granddaughter in my arms. Every act of patience, every decision made in silence, every word spoken only in private, had led to this moment. Recognition, understanding, and reconciliation had arrived not as a dramatic reveal, but as a gentle, quiet truth. I paused at the edge of a small hill, watching the sun dip low against the horizon. Its light stretched across the town in warm bands, softening the outlines of houses, trees, and distant streets. I let my eyes follow the glow, feeling the rhythm of life move steadily forward, steady and unyielding. The years of hurt, the moments of doubt, and the lingering sense of exclusion faded in the amber light. Ethan's voice echoed softly in my memory. The sincerity in his words, the tentative hope in his eyes. And I smiled, faintly. The granddaughter who bore my name was more than a symbol. She was a connection, a bridge between past and future, between what had been lost and what had been restored. The family I had thought forever distant now existed in this small, precious space of trust, acknowledgement, and care. I leaned against the railing, the breeze brushing my hair, and let the quiet settle around me. The house behind me was no longer a place of tension or unspoken anger. It was a place where understanding had grown, where bonds had been mended. I felt the dignity that comes from knowing one's actions mattered, even when unseen, and I carried it with a calm assurance. As the last sliver of sun disappeared, I turned and walked down the path toward home, the light fading softly behind me, and felt a sense of quiet closure that would carry forward into the days to come.